When they humiliated her at work, they didn't know her husband was a billionaire, but they had no idea what was coming next. Janice was always the kind of woman who did her work quietly. She never showed off, never talked too much, and never tried to make people notice her. She believed in doing her job with honesty and staying away from office gossip or drama.
Every
Day, she arrived at the tall glass building in downtown Atlanta, wearing a neat outfit. Her hair carefully done and a calm expression on her face. She greeted the receptionist with a smile, held the elevator door open for others, and always said, "Thank you" when someone helped her. She was polite, patient, and kind. But none of that seemed to matter to the people she worked with. Janice worked at a large marketing firm that was known for its big clients and fast-paced environment. She had been there for almost 7 years. In that time, she had climbed from a simple analyst role to a mid-level manager. Her reports were always perfect, her team respected her, and her clients loved her work. But still, something was always off. She could feel it in the way people looked at her, the way conversations would go quiet when she walked into the room, and the way her ideas were sometimes ignored during meetings. It wasn't always loud or obvious. Nobody said anything cruel to her face. But there were jokes whispered behind her back. There were emails she wasn't copied on. There were lunch plans made without her. When she did speak up, some of her coworkers acted like she was too sensitive, like she couldn't take a joke or didn't know how to relax. They would laugh with each other, joke loudly in meetings, and then look at her like she didn't belong. Janice wasn't just any woman. She was smart, capable, and confident. She was also a black woman in a company where very few people looked like her. She had learned long ago to stay calm in the face of disrespect. Her grandmother used to say, "Don't give them what they're looking for. Stay steady. Let your work speak." And that's what Janice did. She let her work speak. Even when it hurt, even when she felt like crying in the bathroom, she kept her head high. What no one at the office knew was that Janice was married to Elijah Ward, one of the richest men in the country. Elijah had made his fortune in the tech world, building software that changed how companies manage data and communication. He was smart, powerful, and extremely private. He rarely appeared in the news, never posted on social media, and lived in a quiet part of town. Janice and Elijah had met years ago at a small conference. She had no idea who he was at the time, and he loved that. They talked about books, travel, and family. He was calm and grounded, and he saw in her something no one else did. Strength. Even after they got married, Janice never used his name to get ahead. She didn't want people to treat her differently just because of who her husband was. She wanted to earn respect on her own, and Elijah supported that. He never showed up at her office. He never called her during work hours, unless it was an emergency. He admired her independence, and she loved him for never trying to overshadow her. But he also told her, more than once, if anyone ever disrespects you in a way you can't forgive, you don't have to handle it alone. Just say the word. Janice never said the word, not even when the new executive team came in. About 3 months ago, the company hired a few senior directors from another firm. They were loud, flashy, and confident. They acted like they owned the place, walking around like they were on a stage. One of them, a man named Craig, had a loud voice and a bigger ego. He often joked around during meetings, interrupting people and making sarcastic comments. Another woman named Ashley acted sweet but often gave Janice fake smiles and cold eyes. There was also Derek, who rarely spoke to Janice unless he had to, and when he did, was usually to question her decisions or make her explain herself more than anyone else. Janice noticed the change right away. The atmosphere grew colder. She was suddenly being left out of key meetings, and when she asked about it, they said things like, "Oh, it was just casual," or "We didn't think it concerned your department." Her team members started acting differently too. Some were more distant, unsure if they should still show support for her. A few younger employees stayed loyal, but even they seemed nervous. No one wanted to be seen on the wrong side of the new power structure. Despite everything, Janice kept going. She worked harder. She stayed longer hours. She smiled when she didn't feel like smiling. She reminded herself that she had worked too hard to let people like Craig and Ashley make her quit. But even the strongest people have a breaking point. That breaking point came one Friday afternoon. The company was hosting a casual office party on the rooftop to celebrate a recent project win. There were drinks, snacks, music, and laughter. People were dressed more casually than usual, holding cups of soda and chatting in groups. Janice didn't feel like going, but she didn't want to seem distant or unfriendly, so she went, wearing a simple white blouse and black slacks, holding a small plate of fruit and standing near the edge of the crowd. Craig, Ashley, and a few others were at the center of the party, laughing loudly. They had already had a few drinks and were clearly in a playful, mocking mood. Janice stayed away from them, talking to one of her team members quietly. But then Craig's voice rose above the music. Well, look who decided to show up, said, pointing at Janice. People turned to look. Janice gave a polite smile, hoping the attention would pass quickly, but Craig wasn't done. He picked up a can of Coca-Cola from the table, shook it slightly, and grinned. Hey, Janice, welcome to the party, he shouted before anyone could stop him. He popped the can and threw it toward her. It hit her shoulder, and the sticky soda splashed across her blouse and down her arm. There was a sharp gasp from someone nearby. Others laughed nervously, not sure what to do. Some turned away. Some looked at the ground. No one said anything. Janice stood still, her hands clenched. The cold, sticky drink soaked through her blouse, and for a moment she couldn't even feel. Her body, her face burned, not from the soda, but from the humiliation. Craig was still grinning, clearly thinking it was all a joke. Ashley giggled and whispered something to Derek, who smirked. Janice didn't say a word. She placed her plate on the table, wiped her hands on a napkin, and walked away slowly. She didn't run. She didn't cry. She just left. She drove home. In silence, not even turning on the radio. When she reached her driveway, she sat in the car for 5 minutes, trying to breathe. When she finally walked in, Elijah was in the kitchen making tea. He turned around and saw the soda stains on her blouse. He didn't ask anything right away, just looked at her, and something changed in his eyes. Janice sat down at the table and told him everything, not just about the Coca-Cola, but everything. That had been building up: the meetings, the comments, the way she was treated. She spoke slowly, and Elijah listened without interrupting. When she was done, he placed his hand on hers and said, "You should have told me sooner." She looked at him, tired but still calm. "I wanted to handle it on my own," she said, "but I think this time it's too much." Elijah nodded. "Then let me take care of it." She didn't ask what he meant. She knew. That night, Elijah made a few calls. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He had power, and he knew how to use it when the time came. And now the time had come. The office didn't know it yet, but everything was about to change. The next morning, the office looked like any other Monday. People walked in, some yawning with coffee in their hands, some talking about their weekend plans, and others just trying to survive another workday. Nobody really talked about what had happened at the rooftop party on Friday. Few people who had been there mentioned it quietly, sharing nervous glances, but no one spoke loudly. Some thought it was just a joke that went a little too far. Others felt uncomfortable, but didn't want to be involved. Some simply didn't care. Everyone was moving on, pretending that nothing had happened. But Janice wasn't there. Her desk was empty. Craig walked in with his usual confidence. He wore a navy blue suit and dark sunglasses, acting like he owned the building. He high-fived. A colleague laughed loudly and said, "Another day, another win." He didn't seem bothered at all. Ashley followed behind him, holding her phone and sipping her iced coffee. She looked calm, maybe even proud. A few of their group from the party chuckled when they saw Craig, like they were sharing a secret joke. By 10 a.m., the office was busy again. Emails were flying, phones were ringing, and meetings were happening. No one seemed to notice the silence around Janice's absence anymore. HR had received her complaint on Friday evening, but no action had been taken. In fact, Janice hadn't even received a reply. It was like the system itself had swallowed her words and ignored them. Back at home, Janice sat on the edge of her bed. She had woken up early, dressed in a soft sweater and jeans, and braided her hair. She didn't plan to go to work that day. She felt numb, not just because of what had happened with the Coca-Cola, but because of the way no one had stood up for her. Not a single person had said, "That's not okay." Not one. She kept replaying the moment in her head, Craig's loud voice, the cold splash of soda, the laughter, the silence, the way no one came to help. It wasn't just humiliation. It was betrayal. After years of showing up early, working hard, treating everyone with kindness, this was how they treated her. Like she was nothing. Like she didn't matter. Downstairs, Elijah was on a phone call. He had been up late making plans, calling his legal team, and gathering information. He wasn't angry in a loud, explosive way. He was calm to calm. Was the kind of calm that made people nervous. He didn't yell, didn't threaten, simply moved with quiet power. He had spoken to his lawyers, his investment team, and even some board members of the company. What most people in the office didn't know was that Elijah wasn't just Janice's husband, he was also one of the company's biggest silent investors. Years ago, he had bought a large portion of shares through a private equity firm. No one had connected the dots. He had kept it hidden on purpose. But now, the silence was over. That afternoon, Elijah told Janice, "I'm going to the office." "Tomorrow?" She looked at him, unsure. "You don't have to do that," she said quietly. He gave her a small smile. "I'm not going there as your husband. I'm going there as someone who has a responsibility." Janice didn't ask any more questions. She knew him, and when he made up his mind, no one could stop him. The next day started like any other. People arrived at work, carrying their laptops, grabbing coffee, and joking with each other. Craig was already in the meeting room with a few executives. Ashley was at her desk, scrolling through social media. Derek was reviewing a report, occasionally glancing at the clock. Everything seemed normal at exactly 10:17 a.m. The building's lobby doors opened, and Elijah Ward walked in. He wasn't wearing a suit, just dark jeans, a gray jacket, and a black shirt. But there was something about his presence, quiet but powerful. The security guard at the front desk stood up quickly, recognizing him from a photo he had seen once in an investment meeting. Elijah nodded politely and said, "I need to speak to the board. It's urgent." Within 10 minutes, the news had spread to every floor. A billionaire investor had arrived unannounced. People peeked out of their offices. Some whispered in the hallways. No one knew exactly what was happening, but everyone felt the tension. Craig laughed when he heard about it. "It's probably some rich guy trying to swing his money around," he joked. Ashley shrugged. "Who cares? Doesn't concern us." They didn't know what was coming. Inside the boardroom, Elijah sat across from the company's top leaders. He didn't yell. He didn't raise his voice. He simply asked one question. "Can someone explain to me what happened at the Friday rooftop party?" There was silence. The CEO, a tall man with gray hair and nervous eyes, cleared his throat. We're still looking into the details," he said carefully. "There was some misunderstanding, I believe. HR is reviewing the incident." Elijah leaned forward. A can of Coca-Cola was thrown at a senior manager. She filed a report. No one responded. "Do you call that a misunderstanding?" The room grew colder. One of the legal advisors tried to speak, but Elijah raised his hand. "Save it. I've seen the footage." He opened his tablet and played the video, which had been captured by the rooftop security cameras. The entire room watched as Craig's actions unfolded on screen. No one could say it was a joke. It wasn't funny. It was clear, cruel humiliation. "I want the names of everyone who laughed," Elijah said. "Everyone who did nothing. Everyone who brushed it off." No one spoke. A few eyes darted toward the door. The CEO swallowed hard. Elijah stood up. "Let me remind you, this company survives because of investors like me. I don't support companies that protect bullies." Within an hour, Craig, Ashley, and Derek were called into a private meeting. They entered laughing, came out silent. Their faces were pale, and none of them returned to their desks. Security quietly escorted them out. The rest of the office was stunned. Rumors flew. People whispered. Some were scared. Others were shocked. A few even felt relieved. That afternoon, the company sent out an official email. It said that after a thorough review of serious workplace misconduct, several employees had been terminated. It also stated that a new leadership and cultural review would begin immediately. Janice was sitting in her living room when her phone buzzed. She read the email and sat still for a long time, then her phone rang. It was Elijah. "It's done," he said gently. Janice didn't know what to say. She felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, sadness, disbelief. So hard to stay strong, to not let anyone see her pain. And now, justice had arrived, not through shouting or revenge, but through quiet power and love. "I didn't want it to happen like this," she whispered. "I know," Elijah said, "but they crossed the line." That night, Janice sat on her porch, watching the stars. She thought about all the days she had kept quiet, all the times she had swallowed her pride just to get through the day. She thought about the people who looked at her and saw someone small, someone they could treat however they wanted. But she wasn't small. She had never been. They had thrown Coca-Cola at her like she was nothing. Now they were gone. Justice didn't always come quickly. But sometimes, when the world stayed quiet, Storm would walk in, wearing jeans and a gray jacket and remind everyone what real power looked like. It was just another Tuesday morning in the office, or at least that's how it seemed on the surface. But deep down, something was different. People were nervous. Some were whispering in the break room, while others pretended to be busy tapping their keyboards without really working. Everyone had heard what happened the day before. The news had spread like fire. Elijah Ward, the billionaire tech genius no one had ever seen in person, had walked into the building without warning and fired 3 of the highest-ranking employees on the spot. No one had seen it coming. One day, Craig was laughing and joking. In meetings, Ashley was strutting through the hallways like she owned the place, and Derek was giving orders like a mini-boss. The next day, they were all gone, not just fired, but escorted out of the building by security with their badges disabled, and their names deleted from the internal system. It was quick, silent, and terrifying. People who used to stay close to Craig and his circle were now quiet, unsure of where they stood. Others who had always kept their heads down began to hope, just a little, that maybe things were going to change. Still, no one truly understood how big this moment really was until they saw what happened next. At exactly 9:45 a.m., Elijah Ward returned. This time he wasn't alone. He arrived in a sleek black car with tinted windows, and out stepped a group of men and women in dark suits, his legal team, CADA senior HR consultants, and a few trusted advisors from his own company. They didn't speak to anyone on their way in. They walked straight to the top floor like they had done it 1,000 times before. Elijah didn't carry a briefcase. He didn't need one. All he had was a tablet in his hand and a mission in his heart. The receptionist stood up nervously as they walked past. Elijah simply nodded once, a calm look on his face. He wasn't angry, at least not on the outside. His face was still, focused, unreadable, but people could feel the weight in the air. It was like a storm had come, but without thunder. Just the heavy silence before everything changed. An emergency meeting was called. Department heads, executives, team leaders all were told to report to the main conference room immediately. Inside that room, you could hear the sound of chairs moving, papers shuffling, and nervous throat clearing. Some people looked around, confused. Others sat stiffly, not sure whether to speak or stay silent. The CEO, a man who had always walked with confidence, now looked tired and unsure. Elijah stood at the front of the room. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't pace. He just stood still and looked at them. "I'm not here for drama," he said in a calm, deep voice. "I'm here for truth." The room stayed silent. "You all know what happened last week," he continued, or maybe some of you pretended not to see it. A black woman, one of your most dedicated and hardworking employees, was humiliated in front of the entire staff. Not one of you stood up for her. Not one of you made a move to stop it. Some of you laughed, some of you walked away, and some of you just stayed silent, thinking that staying quiet would keep you safe. A few people lowered their heads, as others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. No one dared to interrupt. Elijah tapped his tablet, and a video started playing. On the large screen behind him was security footage from the rooftop party. It showed Craig grabbing the can of Coca-Cola, shaking it, and throwing it at Janice. The slow-motion replay made it even more painful to watch. Janice stood there, drenched in soda, frozen in shock, while the people around her either laughed or did nothing at all. After the video ended, Elijah paused. No one spoke. "She didn't ask for any special treatment," he said quietly. "She never used my name. She never asked me for favors. She wanted to earn everything on her own, and she did. She worked harder than most of you in this room. Still, you treated her like she didn't belong." Someone tried to speak a middle. Manager named Peter, but Elijah held up his hand. "Not yet," he said firmly. "First, I want to make something very clear. I'm not just Janice's husband. I'm also one of the largest investors in this company. I've been silent for years, watching from a distance. But that silence ends today." He walked slowly to the center of the room. "From this moment forward, there will be no more tolerance for discrimination, humiliation, or silence. We are going to clean this company from the inside out. Anyone who stood by while that woman was hurt will be reviewed. Anyone who ignored her complaints will be held accountable. And anyone who thinks this is just about race or politics, you can pack your things and leave now." Still, no one moved. No one said a word. The power in Elijah's voice wasn't in the volume, it was in the truth. One by one, he started calling names. "Peter, Amanda, Lucas, you were there that day. I've seen the footage. You laughed. You joked. You did nothing. We're suspended immediately, pending a full investigation." The named employees froze in place. Amanda looked like she might cry. Lucas tried to protest, but Elijah didn't give him a chance. Then he turned to the HR director. "You received her complaint on Friday? You ignored it." "Why?" the director stammered. I didn't think it was serious." Elijah raised his eyebrow. "Not serious? A woman is assaulted with a can of soda in front of witnesses, and you think that's not serious?" The director had no answer. "You're fired," Elijah said calmly. "Effective immediately." Gasps echoed through the room. No one had expected it to go this far. But Elijah wasn't finished. He turned toward the rest of the board. "I will be appointing a temporary leadership team while we restructure. From this point on, all hiring, promotion, and complaint processes will be audited. We will bring in diversity and ethics consultants to train and re-educate every department. And yes, we will start at the top." Someone finally asked, "Who's going to lead this?" Elijah smiled gently. "Janice." The silence that followed was deep and sharp. Eyes widened. Some people looked surprised. Others seemed unsure. Few looked ashamed. "She didn't ask for this," Elijah said. "But she earned it. Every single day. She has the discipline, the strength, and the vision this company needs. And she has my full support." Back at home, Janice was sitting by the window, sipping tea, when she got the call. "Can you come to the office?" Elijah asked. "There's something I'd like you to see." Janice hesitated. She hadn't stepped foot in that building since. The party part of her didn't want to go back. But something inside her told her she had to. Not for them, for herself. She got dressed slowly. A simple dark green dress, black heels, and a gold bracelet her grandmother had given her. Her hair was braided neatly, and her face was calm. She didn't feel nervous. She felt ready. When she arrived, people stopped what they were doing. Some watched from behind glass doors. Others stood in silence as she walked past. This time, there were no smirks, no whispers. Only respect and maybe fear. She stepped into the boardroom and saw Elijah standing there, along with a few others. He looked at her with quiet pride. "We've made some changes," he said. "The job is yours, if you want it." Janice looked around the room, the same room where her voice had once been ignored. The same room where people had looked through her like she was invisible. And now they were all looking at her like she mattered. "I'll take it," she said softly. Applause broke out, gentle at first, then stronger. But Janice didn't smile out of pride. She smiled because she had survived. Not just the soda, not just the laughter, but the years of being unseen. And now, they couldn't ignore her anymore. Janice sat alone in her new office, staring out the large window that overlooked the city. The same street she had once walked every morning just to get to work now looked different. This office, once far away from her reach, now belonged to her. The nameplate on the door still felt surreal. Head of operations. It was shiny, new, and real. But the position wasn't what gave her satisfaction. It was the quiet victory she had earned after years of struggle, silent pain, and staying strong in the face of disrespect. Her first day in charge was calm, but everyone in the building could feel a different energy. People no longer laughed loudly in the hallways or whispered in corners. They moved carefully, respectfully. Some were truly happy for Janice, others were scared. And then there were those who simply didn't know what to feel. After all, just a few days ago, they had treated her like she was just another employee who could be ignored. Now, she was the one signing documents, leading meetings, and deciding who stayed and who left. Janice wasn't interested in revenge. She didn't come to her new position with anger or bitterness, but she did come with a clear purpose. She knew the company had to change not just on the surface, but deep inside. What had happened to her could not happen again to anyone, not in this company, not under her leadership. She started by calling a meeting with the Human Resources Department. The new interim HR head, a woman named Clara, had been hired by Elijah's team. Clara was professional, sharp, and honest. In the meeting, Janice said something that made everyone sit up straight. We're not going to cover anything up anymore. No matter how uncomfortable the truth is, we're going to face it. From now on, every complaint will be taken seriously, and every voice will be heard. Some of the HR staff looked nervous. They'd gotten used to ignoring uncomfortable complaints and pretending not to see bad behavior. But Janice didn't leave room for doubt. She made it clear that things had changed, that anyone who didn't want to be part of the new system was free to leave. After the meeting, Janice called in several junior employees who had been working under her in her old role. They were surprised when she invited them into her office. Some thought they were in trouble. But Janice just smiled and said, I remember who stood by me. I remember who helped me when things were hard. I haven't forgotten you. She gave 2 of them promotions, not because they were perfect, but because they had shown kindness and loyalty during the time when others had turned away. One of them, a young man named Troy, had once stood up to Craig in a meeting quietly, but firmly. At the time, no one had noticed, but Janice had. And now it was time to reward that kind of courage. As the week went on, Janice began holding one-on-one conversations with department heads. She didn't attack them. She asked questions. She listened. Some admitted they had made mistakes. Some apologized. Others tried to make excuses. Janice didn't need to argue. She could see through people. Her strength was not in raising her voice. It was in how she made others see the truth without forcing it on them. Every day she received messages from employees thanking her. One woman, a janitor who had worked in the building for 10 years, said, "It feels good to finally be seen." Another man from the tech team told her, "You've made us believe that doing the right thing actually matters." These weren't people who had power before. But now, under Janice, they felt that their voices mattered too. Elijah visited the office only once that week. He didn't walk in with bodyguards or lawyers this time, came alone in a quiet moment. Just to see Janice, she smiled when she saw him at her door. "I didn't think I'd see you again so soon," she said softly. "I just came to say I'm proud of you," he replied. They didn't need to say much. Elijah knew Janice could handle this on her own. He'd never wanted to take over her battle just to give her the tools to fight it fairly by the end of the second week. Several more employees had been let go, not because Janice was punishing them, but because the reviews showed they had been part of the toxic culture. Some were given a second chance with extra training, but others were released quietly. Each exit was handled with professionalism. There were no scenes, no anger, just a clean break and a clear message. This was a new beginning. Janice also introduced new workshops for the entire company. One of them was called Speaking Up, how to use your voice. Another was focused on unconscious bias, helping employees recognize the small, quiet ways in which racism, sexism, and disrespect often show up in workplaces. These workshops weren't just lectures. They included real-life role-plays, group discussions, and personal stories. And Janice joined every single one of them. She didn't sit in a fancy chair at the front. She sat with everyone else as an equal. At first, some people were uncomfortable. They weren't used to talking openly about these issues. But Janice created an environment where no one felt judged. She made people feel safe, and in return, they opened up. One day during a session, a white male employee stood up and said, "I didn't realize how much I'd ignored. I used to think staying quiet was the same as staying neutral. But now I see that silence can be just as harmful as the act itself." Janice nodded. "You're not the only one," she said. "What matters is what you do now." Word of what was happening in the company began to spread outside the building. Other firms started calling, asking Janice to speak at events. News articles were written about the change in culture, the leadership shift, and the courage shown by a woman who had once been invisible. Some called her the Quiet Storm, a name that made her smile not because it sounded strong, but because it felt true. She had never screamed to be heard. She had waited, stayed calm, finally taken her place. Even former employees who had left the company years ago began reaching out to her. One woman wrote, "I left because I couldn't take the silence anymore. But seeing what you've done makes me wish I had stayed a little longer." Another man wrote, "You didn't just stand up for yourself. You stood up for all of us." Janice didn't let the praise get to her head. She still arrived early, still treated everyone with kindness, and still walked through the building with the same quiet grace she always had. But now, when she walked past, people stood up a little straighter. Not out of fear, but out of respect. One morning, as she walked into the building, the receptionist handed her a small envelope. It had no name on it, just a simple sticker. With the word "thanks" inside was a short note in neat handwriting. "You didn't have to stay. You didn't have to fight. But you did. And because of that, I finally believe that this place can be better." She kept that note in her drawer. Not for pride. For strength. For the days when the weight of leadership felt heavy and the path ahead seemed unclear. By the end of the month, the company looked and felt completely different. It wasn't perfect, but it was finally trying. And that made all the difference. Janice didn't change things by force. She changed them by being steady, by being clear, and by remembering who she was. She never let pain turn her cold. She never let disrespect make her bitter. She took the same quiet dignity that had once been ignored and turned it into power. And in doing so, she didn't just reclaim her own dignity, she gave others the courage to do the same. The weeks passed, and the company continued to change under Janice's leadership. What had once been a place where silence and fear ruled was slowly turning into a space filled with hope and respect. People began to believe that things could be different, not perfect yet, but better. Janice's quiet strength inspired others, showing them that one person could make a big difference. Even when the odds seemed impossible, she faced many challenges along the way. Not everyone was happy with the new direction. Some former employees, those who had been fired or who felt threatened by the changes, tried to spread rumors about her. They whispered that she was too strict, too demanding, or that she only cared about one group of people. Janice ignored them. She knew that when you stand for what is right, criticism will come. The important thing was to keep moving forward. One day, a reporter from a popular business magazine requested an interview. The headline they suggested was bold: "How Janice Turned a Billion-Dollar Company Around with Courage and Compassion." Janice was nervous. She had never been in the spotlight before, and she wasn't sure she wanted that kind of attention. But she agreed. If sharing her story could help others, then it was worth it. During the interview, the reporter asked her about the moment her husband walked into the office and fired everyone. Janice smiled softly and said, "That was a turning point, but it wasn't the real beginning. The real work started when I stepped into this office and decided to stay. To fight for change, not just for myself, but for everyone who felt invisible." She talked about the long nights, the difficult conversations, and the moments when she felt like giving up.
Wow.
But she also spoke about the small victories, the thank you notes from employees, the changes in company culture, and the growing sense of community. The article was published and quickly went viral. People from all over the world sent messages of support. Women, men, young and old, shared their own stories of struggle and hope. Janice's story became more than just about one company. It became a symbol of what is possible when courage meets determination. Back at the office, Janice kept working hard. She introduced new programs to support mental health and wellness, understanding that true change wasn't just about policies but about caring for people's well-being. She started mentorship programs to help younger employees grow and succeed, especially those from groups that had been historically overlooked one day. Elijah surprised her by announcing a large donation to local schools and community centers to support education and opportunity. He credited Janice for inspiring the company to give back, reminding everyone that success isn't just measured in dollars, but in the lives we touch. Janice also made sure the company's hiring practices became more inclusive. Job postings were rewritten to attract diverse candidates, and interview panels were made more representative. She believed that diversity wasn't just a buzzword, it was a strength that made the company smarter, more creative, and more connected to the world. Her efforts didn't go unnoticed by the employees. More people volunteered for the programs, more voices were heard in meetings, and the workplace slowly transformed into a place where respect was the rule, not the exception. Janice's leadership also inspired other companies in the industry to take a hard look at their own cultures. Invitations to speak at conferences, participate in panels, and join advisory boards came pouring in. She became a role model not because she sought fame, but because she lived her truth every day. Despite all the success, Janice remained humble. She never forgot the pain and humiliation she had experienced. Instead, she used those memories as fuel to keep pushing for fairness and kindness. She often said, "We rise by lifting others." At home, her relationship with Elijah grew stronger. They supported each other, understanding the unique pressures that came with their work and their public lives. They celebrated each victory, quietly, away from the spotlight, and planned for a future where their family could thrive. One afternoon, Janice received a letter from a young woman who had just started her first job in a different city. The letter said, "Your story gave me hope. When I felt invisible and unheard, I remembered what you did. It showed me that I can stand up for myself too. Thank you for being brave." Janice kept the letter on her desk, a reminder that the ripples of change reached far beyond the walls of the company. Looking back, she realized that her journey had been about much more than just one incident. It was about reclaiming dignity, creating community, and changing hearts and minds. It was about turning pain into power and silence, to a voice that could no longer be ignored. Her story became a testament to the strength found in perseverance, the importance of standing up against injustice, and the incredible impact one person can have when they refuse to give up. And so, the company that once allowed cruelty and silence to flourish became a place where respect, inclusion, and hope lived. All because one woman, faced with humiliation, chose not to hide but to rise. Janice's journey was not just her own. It was the journey of everyone who had ever felt unseen and unheard. It was a story of courage, change, and the power of one to change many.